Tonight we're slipping into a world of creaky floorboards, candlelit corridors, and the most unusually soothing bedtime rituals you've never tried, like steeping lettuce leaves in hot water at midnight and letting piano music lull you into unconsciousness. You're here for that rare, drowsy blend of history and sleepiness, and trust me, Victorian England is about to deliver. There's something oddly comforting about watching people from another era try desperately not to lose their minds from chronic insomnia by boiling salad and calling it medicine. Honestly, you probably won't survive this story without drifting off first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments, and maybe we'll all feel a little less alone in the dark. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly across cold stone tiles, your slippers whispering against the floor as the clock tower tolls once. It's midnight in a modest London townhouse, and everyone should be asleep except you. The fire's been banked, and the cat's already curled up on the hearth like it owns the place. But your mind won't stop humming. Too many thoughts, not enough sleep. You know the feeling. You push open the kitchen door and breathe in the faint scent of coal smoke, peppered with something vegetal and slightly bitter. On the wooden countertop sits a kettle, just beginning to hiss. And next to it, laid out carefully like a shrine to drowsiness, a small plate of butter lettuce. Yes, lettuce. Victorians were obsessed with sleep almost as much as they were with losing it. One of their more harmless obsessions was lettuce water, or lettuce tea. They'd simmer romaine, butterhead, or whatever green leaves they could get their hands on, claiming that the milky sap, called lactucarium, worked like a gentle sedative. In truth, it's mildly sedating at best, but that didn't stop half of England from dunking salad in their teapots. You gently drop a few limp leaves into a chipped porcelain mug. The steam rises slowly, coiling toward the ceiling. The taste? Watery, slightly grassy, a bit like sipping from your garden hose after a light rain. But if you were a Victorian insomniac, this was liquid gold. There's something strangely sweet about the ritual. Waiting for the water to cool just enough. Taking that first bitter sip. Hoping, praying it might quiet the static in your mind. The scientific logic was fuzzy at best, but the placebo, powerful. Victorians swore it worked. Historians still argue whether the mild sedative effect of lettuce was real or just imagined by desperate minds. Over time, people started adding all sorts of sleepy enhancements, honey, nutmeg, or even a dash of brandy if no one was watching. You swirl your cup slowly, half hoping the swirling will hypnotize you into drowsiness. The kitchen clock ticks steadily in the corner. The house is quiet, except for the occasional pop from the cooling stove. You sip again. Still not sleepy. Well, not yet. You glance out the window, and the gas lamps outside blur in the mist. The cobbled street looks almost velvety in the low light. Somewhere, a horse's hoof clinks against stone, echoing like a heartbeat. You imagine the thousands of other sleepless souls across the city, quietly boiling lettuce, rubbing their eyes, and pretending this will work. Of course, lettuce tea was just one of many curious methods Victorians tried. There was also a belief that merely smelling warm lettuce leaves could bring about a sense of serenity. A few women even tied damp leaves around their temples like salad bonnets. Not particularly fashionable, but hey, this was a time when arsenic eyeliner was a thing. And speaking of side effects, overconsumption of lettuce tea sometimes caused mild digestive issues, and the occasional midnight sprint to the chamber pot. Romantic. You take another sip. Your eyes feel a bit heavier now, but that could just be the heat of the mug. Still, you play along. The Victorians would want you to. It's oddly charming how much faith they placed in the natural world. Every leaf, every root had a purpose. Every sleepless night had a plant-based answer. Behind you, the old cupboard groans. You turn, half expecting a ghost, but it's just the house settling. Or maybe the lettuce finally working its magic. Either way, your thoughts are slowing down. Your breath evens out. Still, you're not quite ready to go back upstairs. Not yet. You rinse the mug, wipe your hands on a checkered towel, and wander into the dim hallway. Somewhere in the distance, a soft melody is playing, barely audible, like a memory or a dream leaking through the walls. And just like that, you drift forward. Out of the kitchen, out of the lettuce-scented hush, into the next layer of the Victorian night. The music comes in soft waves, tentative, like someone unsure whether they're playing for an audience or just themselves. You follow it. Down the hall, past creaking floorboards and a slumbering grandfather clock with a face that looks mildly disapproving of your wakefulness. You ignore it, stepping lightly toward the parlor. Inside, the wallpaper is a sleepy blur of faded roses. A fireplace clicks softly as embers settle. And there, bathed in the golden flicker of firelight, is the source of the music. A woman in a nightgown, seated at a walnut upright piano, fingers moving like they're underwater. She doesn't notice you, or pretends not to. You settle into a nearby chair, the cushions sighing beneath you. Her song has no clear rhythm, no grand climax. Just soft, repeating melodies. A lullaby with no words. In Victorian England, this wasn't unusual. Wealthy families often kept a piano in the parlor, and late-night playing was a quiet rebellion against the era's obsession with discipline and order. For those who couldn't sleep, music became a gentle form of protest, an invitation for rest that words couldn't quite manage. Some even believed in the literal power of music to heal the sleepless. Soporific harmonies, they called them. Piano sonatas, cello drones, the occasional harp interlude. The idea was that certain keys, especially low ones, played slowly, could influence the heartbeat, calm the nerves, and nudge the brain into shutting up already. A sort of sonic valerian route. The woman shifts, eyes half closed, and lets a slow glissando fall like rain on the keys. You feel it more than hear it, vibrations threading through your spine, down to your fingers. Your shoulders unclench slightly, like they're remembering something soft. Historians still argue whether the Victorians genuinely believed in music's medical power or simply leaned on it out of romantic idealism. But in a world without Netflix, podcasts, or Ambien, this was as close as it got to a lullaby playlist. And honestly, it works better than you expect. Some doctors of the time even prescribed piano music to their patients. Not to play, just to hear. Imagine a handwritten prescription, 10 minutes of nocturne in A-flat, nightly. A few musicians, sensing a business opportunity, even composed pieces labeled for the insomniac soul. Today, they'd be trending on low-fi sleep playlists. There was, however, a bit of moral panic. Some critics warned that playing music too late at night, especially melancholy pieces, could weaken the mind, encourage indecency, or, worse, awaken unladylike passions. Because of course they did. Nothing says Victorian era like assuming Chopin leads directly to moral decay. Still, parlor music persisted. It was a rare form of solitude in a world full of stiff collars, rigid etiquette, and too many teaspoons. It let people feel without being watched too closely. The woman at the piano plays slower now. Her hands hover between notes. Maybe she's forgotten what comes next. Maybe that's the point. You close your eyes and let the music wrap around you like a thick blanket. You think of all the other parlors just like this one, with other sleepless players striking quiet keys in the hope of peace. And here's the quirky part: some Victorians believed music should be paired with color therapy for better sleep. Blue drapes, blue rugs, and yes, even blue sheet music covers. The color was thought to calm the mind and dampen overactive spirits. One sleep manual from 1869 boldly stated, "A room of cerulean hue shall silence the tempestuous thoughts." Overdramatic? Yes. But who among us hasn't bought a calming candle that smells suspiciously like nothing? You glance around the room, and now that it's mentioned, the wallpaper does have a bluish tint. Or maybe your eyes are just tired. Either way, the overall effect is dreamlike. The fire dies a little more. The piano slows. A final chord lingers in the air, vibrating against silence. She stands without looking at you, nods to no one in particular, and glides from the room like a ghost in a Jane Austen fan fiction. You're alone now. But it's the good kind of alone, the kind that lets you sink deeper into yourself. You stretch, letting your fingertips graze the curved arm of the chair. The upholstery is slightly threadbare, but comforting in its imperfection. You wonder how many people have sat here before, listening to that same song, hoping it might lull them back to sleep. You feel something small and square beneath your hand. A little leather-bound music journal, forgotten between the cushions. Inside, just 2 lines are scrawled in pencil. Sleep walks in velvet. Invite it softly. Who wrote it? Doesn't matter. It fits. The clock in the hallway ticks again, this time more gently. You rise from the chair, legs warm and unsteady. A new kind of quiet has filled the house. Less expectant, more surrendering. You step toward the hallway again, leaving the piano behind. But a few notes echo in your head. You hum them softly as you pass the library door. The lettuce hasn't quite worked. The music helped. But you're still hovering in that odd space between wake and dream. And luckily, there's still more night to explore. The library smells like dust, old leather, and whatever ink does when it's sat still for 100 years. You ease the door shut behind you, muffling the world into silence. Heavy drapes cloak the tall windows, muting the moonlight. You move toward the shelves, not to read, but because they feel safe, reassuringly occupied by someone else's words. In the far corner sits a rickety writing desk, and on top of it, a cluster of bottles catches the dim glow from the hearth. You lean closer. There's a delicate clinking sound as glass touches glass. The labels are aged, curling at the edges like dried leaves. You squint and read aloud, barely above a whisper: chloral hydrate, valerian tincture, ether drops, nervine elixir. It's basically a Victorian sleep cocktail menu. Chloral hydrate, that heavy hitter, was first synthesized in 1832, but didn't gain fame as a sedative until the 1860s. It was one of the first real chemical sleep aids, and boy, did it knock people out. Insomniacs swore by it. Poets overused it. And doctors prescribed it liberally, with cheerful optimism and little understanding of long-term effects. A few drops in water, and your mind would melt into darkness. A few drops too many, and, well, let's just say there were fewer insomniacs the next morning. You pick up a little green bottle labeled Nervine Elixir. It sounds gentle, but it's a deceptive name. These were catch-all tonics, often blending herbs like valerian, skullcap, and hops, combined with just enough alcohol to ensure customers felt something. One popular version claimed to quiet the brain's thunder, which sounds poetic until you realize thunder isn't something you want happening in your brain to begin with. You unstopper the bottle and take a careful sniff. It smells like licorice, wet bark, and maybe regret. You put it back. Historians still argue whether these concoctions did more good than harm. Some swear valerian root alone helped calm racing thoughts, while others insist the real sedative was social, just knowing you'd done something about your sleeplessness. Action, even if fruitless, can feel like progress at 2 a.m. Of course, there were fringe remedies, too. One particularly unhinged entry from a women's health pamphlet suggests taking a single drop of turpentine on the tongue, followed by prayer. That's one way to knock yourself out. Or possibly, off. You lean back in the chair and rub your temples. Your reflection stares at you from the darkened window, a little bleary, maybe a touch skeptical. How many Victorians sat just like this, chasing down sleep in brown bottles and herbal infusions? One bottle has a handwritten tag. To be taken when the ghosts are loud. Charming. Also concerning. You don't open that one. The allure of sleep tonics wasn't just about their effectiveness. It was about the ritual. The measuring spoon. The dropper. The quiet clink of bottle against glass. The illusion of control. Even now, you feel your heart rate slow as you imagine preparing a dose, not taking it, just preparing. There's something soothing in the idea that help is near, even if it's mostly herbs and hope. You slide open a drawer in the desk. Inside, a folded leaflet offers Dr. Bellamy's night syrup for nervous women. It promises to banish terrible dreams, restless legs, and thoughts of misfortune. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds like an ancestor of modern melatonin, if melatonin came with a side of arsenic and deeply entrenched gender bias. The sad truth is, many of these cures were aimed at women, who were expected to be delicate, well-rested, and mostly silent. A sleepless woman was often branded hysterical, a sleepless man, merely troubled. This cultural double standard played out in prescriptions, pamphlets, and the very marketing of sleep tonics. Rest was a requirement, but only if you met society's rules for deserving it. You pull open another drawer and find a velvet pouch. Inside, a tiny silver spoon, worn smooth at the edges from nightly use. It might have measured laudanum, or just sugar for bitter valerian tea. Either way, it tells you something important. Someone once sat here night after night, trying to coax sleep with precision and patience. And a little bit of desperation. And yet, some found peace in the simplest ingredients. Poppy syrup, made from steeped poppy heads in sugar water, was common in rural homes. Gentle enough for babies, though, let's be honest, babies in the 1800s were also occasionally given gin. Perspective. You close the drawer and lean back again, eyes tracing the ceiling, now just a faint shape above you. In this dark quiet, the room becomes less of a place and more of a mood. Heavy. Still. Expectant. You wonder what it would have been like to live then, trapped in that elegant, sleep-starved world. Would you have trusted the pharmacist? Boiled another pot of lettuce? Paid a hypnotist? Or just stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything you ever said wrong in your life? Either way, you understand them a little more now. All the tinctures, tonics, and tepid teas, they weren't just about sleep. They were about comfort. About trying. Even when it didn't work. Your head nods slightly. Not asleep, but close. You rise from the desk and let the bottles rest undisturbed. Someone else will need them later. Or maybe they'll just sit there for another century, dreaming quietly in the dark. The hallway feels longer now, like it's quietly reshaping itself while you're not looking. Each footstep is muffled by carpet and softened by the hush of night. Somewhere behind you, a clock resets its breathing, ticking just a little slower. You turn a corner and there it is, the conservatory. Glass panes stretch from floor to ceiling, pale moonlight filtering in through streaks of condensation. The air smells faintly of damp earth, overwatered ferns, and a trace of peppermint from someone's long-forgotten cough drop. You step inside, drawn to a low wooden bench nestled between an oversized fern and a sad-looking lemon tree. Your fingertips brush the edge of a wicker tea tray resting nearby. The porcelain teacup is cold now, but the scent clings: mint, chamomile, and something else. Lettuce. Again. Yes, Victorian England had a real thing for lettuce tea. Not just iceberg. Mind you, they preferred romaine or the more dignified Lactica virosa, sometimes called wild lettuce, which sounds like a rebellious garden variety but is, in fact, nature's sleepy cousin. They brewed the leaves in hot water, let it steep until it turned an unpromising shade of beige, and then sipped it slowly, trying not to gag. The belief was that lettuce contained mild sedative compounds, something akin to opium, but without the scandal or side effects. And hey, it wasn't entirely nonsense. Lactucarium, a milky substance found in wild lettuce sap, does have mild analgesic and sedative effects. Sort of like nature's whisper. You'd need to drink a lot of it to feel anything substantial, though. Like, start planning your bathroom route in advance levels of a lot. Still, desperate times, desperate vegetables. You pick up a dried leaflet from the tray, its edges curled like old petals. It reads, for the overactive mind, lettuce infusion, mint if desired, never boil. Apparently, boiling ruined the magic. That or it just made the flavor even worse. You sit back on the bench, surrounded by shadows of plants that look like they could wake up and whisper advice at any moment. One of them rustles, possibly judging you. You ignore it. Historians still argue whether wild lettuce tea ever truly worked, or if it was just the hot water and wishful thinking doing the heavy lifting. There's a case to be made that the mere act of preparing it, crumbling leaves, heating water, steeping with intention, could lull the brain into sleep mode. A sort of bedtime ritual disguised as botany. And the Victorians loved a ritual. Especially ones that were quiet, herbal, and just slightly mysterious. Lettuce tea became a staple in many middle-class households. Some even swore by stuffing wild lettuce leaves into sachets and placing them under the pillow. Others combined it with chamomile and passion flower for what was basically a drowsiness salad in teacup form. You lean your head back and imagine it. A household winding down for the night. A mother steeping tea while her husband pages through a medical almanac. Children tucked in under wool blankets. The clink of a spoon against porcelain. One last sigh before the fire dims. Of course, not everyone had access to the good lettuce. The more fringe among the sleepless took to boiling whatever they could grow: nettles, dandelion roots, even the occasional moss. One questionable diary entry refers to a snail broth taken before bed, but let's not follow that thread. Some things are better left inside someone else's dream. You sip the phantom tea. It's not there, but your body imagines it anyway: warm, slightly bitter, grounding. You feel your pulse settle into a slower rhythm, like your blood is listening. You glance at the lemon tree again. Its leaves are glossy, drooping slightly. Victorians believed citrus plants could purify the air and brighten the spirit. Some even claimed lemon balm could calm frayed nerves and ease nightmares. Lemon balm tea, another sleepy blend from the apothecary kitchen. Sharp and grassy, like licking a hopeful breeze. You wonder how many sleepless Victorians sat just like this, staring into moonlit leaves, waiting for the tea or time to do its work. You imagine a woman in a housecoat, nervously wringing her hands as she watches her husband pace the floor. Another teaspoon of lettuce tea. Another hymn hummed under her breath. Another hour of silence. The fringe remedies weren't just limited to tea. Some people believed wrapping warm cabbage leaves around the feet could draw the excess heat from the brain, calming overactive thoughts. You make a face. Even now, your toes feel a little itchy at the idea. Still, there's something to be said for the imagination's role in all this. The more elaborate the method, the more potent its promise. If you believe the ritual might work, your brain just might fall for it. That's the beautiful and exasperating part of the human condition. Placebos with style. You run your hand across the wooden bench. It's smooth with age, marked with tiny scratches that look suspiciously like someone tried carving a flower and gave up halfway through. You smile. Maybe they were just trying to stay awake. Or maybe this was their way of slipping quietly toward sleep. A breeze rattles one of the glass panes. The plants shift like gossiping old aunts. The lemon tree drops a single yellowing leaf that spins slowly, silently to the floor. You take that as a sign. The tea may be long gone, but its ghost lingers. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe deeply. Lettuce, mint, memory. Something inside you sighs. You stand, knees cracking like a distant gramophone, and step back into the hallway. The air feels different now, slower, thicker, like you're walking through the dream of a house rather than the house itself. You're not quite sleepy. Not yet. But something inside you has loosened. A knot untied. And there's still more night to go. The stairs creak like they're trying to whisper secrets. You press your palm along the railing, carved, polished, and slightly sticky from time, and begin your slow ascent. Each step feels deliberate, like the house is making sure you mean it. You reach the landing, and to your right, there's a double door slightly ajar. You nudge it open and find yourself in the music room. It's dim, dust-blushed, and eerily tidy. A row of string instruments leans in the corner like gossiping violas. But the real draw is at the far end, a rosewood upright piano. Its surface reflects the low amber light from a single wall sconce. The air smells of old sheet music, brass polish, and faintly, absurdly, lavender. You drift toward the piano, the floor creaking gently underfoot. The keys are exposed, a little uneven, some yellower than others, like teeth that tell stories. You let your fingers hover just above the notes. Not to play, just to feel the nearness of sound. This was a very real part of Victorian insomnia care, music, and specifically, the soothing tones of the household piano. Not for dancing, not for show, but to lull, to sedate, to hush. Piano music was seen as medicinal. The belief was that soft, repetitive melodies, arpeggios, nocturnes, slow waltzes, could nudge the brain toward tranquility. Doctors even advised quiet musical exertion for overexcited minds. A few notes, slowly played, could rhythmically mimic the slowing heart. The piano became a metronome for sleep. You imagine a woman in a long nightdress sitting just like this, spine straight, hands poised. She plays Chopin, slow and hesitant, while her husband paces nearby, brow furrowed, counting each note like a falling feather. Historians still debate whether this musical practice truly helped induce sleep, or whether it was simply an acceptable form of distraction in a society that frowned on idleness. Maybe it wasn't the music at all. Maybe it was the intention, a ritual in a key of F major. You play a note. It rings out, soft but confident, vibrating the wood and dust into memory. Then another. And another. The melody begins to form not from skill, but instinct. Like your hands remember something your mind doesn't. It's hypnotic. The way your body moves. The way the sound loops in slow, echoing spirals. The rhythm lulls you without asking permission. You spot a worn booklet on the piano stand. Nocturnes for nervous sleepers. That's not a joke. These were real collections, printed and sold with the promise of sleep tucked between the clefs. One particularly popular piece was Slumber Waltz for the Frail, composed by someone named Eloise Barrett, who may or may not have existed. Either way, you hum her tune now. Not everyone played, of course. For those less musically inclined, there were wind-up music boxes designed specifically to help induce rest. One bestseller played a 20-minute rendition of Greensleeves, which, if you've ever heard it loop, explains why some Victorians probably stayed awake out of sheer melodic exhaustion. Still, even listening was a practice. Families would gather, not to clap, not to cheer, but to sync. One person would play, and the others would simply let the notes brush over them like slow-moving fog. Fringe circles took it further. There are records of something called acoustic purging, where certain notes, often low and sustained, were believed to draw night demons out of the room. One woman in Essex swore that a steady C minor drone cured her husband's insomnia, though it also apparently sent the cat into fits. You smile. Poor cat. You flip a few pages in the booklet. The sheet music is annotated with looping cursive, notes like too fast, try again slower, and remember to breathe. One corner has a tiny doodle of a sleeping dog curled beside a metronome. Someone really tried here. The metronome itself is still on the piano, triangle-shaped and wood-paneled. You wind it up. Tick, tock, tick-o-tock. It's maddening and soothing in equal measure. Like a gentle argument between your brain and your breath. And it works. Your pulse aligns. You breathe in rhythm. You aren't thinking about not sleeping. You're just here. There's a fringe letter you recall, one written by a music teacher to a medical journal in 1877. He claimed that playing piano scales in descending order could guide the spirit downward into the dream realm. Lofty language for someone who probably just wanted a quieter household, but still. The metaphor sticks with you. Downward. You let your hand fall to a lower octave, playing soft, thick chords like footsteps into moss. Everything slows. The house breathes with you now. And then, silence. Not the brittle kind. Not the you should be sleeping kind. But a rich, textured quiet that feels earned. You close the booklet gently. Let the lid fall back over the keys. The music remains, not in the room, but in your bones. Your ears still hum with it, like sound has melted and seeped into your spine. You turn toward the hallway again, and the shadows there seem deeper, friendlier. A few notes linger behind you like a lullaby still curling in the air. Sleep didn't always arrive. Not even with a perfectly tuned lullaby. But in the act of playing, of trying, the mind could step away from its own noise. And sometimes, that's enough. The hallway outside the music room seems quieter now, like the walls are absorbing sound out of sympathy. Your footsteps are softer, your breathing slower. Whatever the piano stirred in you has settled somewhere between your ribs and your memory. You drift down the corridor, brushing your fingers along the wallpaper, faded florals, peeling slightly at the corners. You pass closed doors, a few cracked ones, a candle stub still clinging to its last inch of wax. And then, tucked between two arched doorways, a narrow staircase leads downward. Servant stairs. You hesitate, then begin your descent. The steps are steep and slightly warped, designed more for speed than comfort. You can almost hear the echo of hurried feet from another century, maids with tea trays, boots squeaking slightly, always one chore behind. At the bottom, the kitchen yawns open, wide, cool, stone-floored. Copper pots glint dully from a rack overhead, and a long wooden table dominates the center of the room. A few mismatched chairs linger nearby, looking tired of being chairs. The hearth, long cold, holds the scent of ash, rosemary, and soot. And in the far corner, there's a tin labeled sleep drafts, Dr. Wainwright. Victorians had no shortage of potions, powders, and tinctures meant to knock you right out, or at least slow you down enough to consider lying still. Many were sold under the dignified guise of tonics or cordials. Some were homemade, passed down through families like slightly questionable heirlooms. You open the tin. Inside, a cluster of small glass vials wrapped in cheesecloth. Each one is labeled in faded ink: laudanum, valerian root, chloral hydrate, Godfrey's cordial. You raise a brow. This little apothecary would give modern pharmacists a nervous breakdown. Let's start with laudanum. This was the darling of the Victorian sleep world, a potent mixture of alcohol and opium. Widely prescribed, casually consumed. Mothers gave it to their infants. Artists drank it by the tablespoon. Clergymen took it to still the racing mind. And yes, it put you to sleep. Eventually. Assuming it didn't just render you wildly poetic or semi-conscious for 12 hours. Historians still argue whether Victorians understood the addictive nature of laudanum. Some knew. Some didn't care. Some convinced themselves they were just a little tired all the time. Tired being a euphemism for buzzed on liquid dreams. Next to it sits valerian root, still around today, still recommended for sleepless nights. Unlike laudanum, it won't get you high, but it might make you smell faintly like old socks and wet hay. The Victorians brewed it into teas or dissolved it in spirits, believing it to quieten the tremors of a vexed soul. Which, honestly, sounds like something we could all use on Mondays. Then there's chloral hydrate. This one's a chemical sleep aid, synthesized in the 19th century and prescribed to insomniacs, lunatics, and nervous debutantes alike. It became so popular that people casually referred to it as knockout drops. Charles Dickens reportedly used it toward the end of his life. Less poetic, more pharmaceutical. And Godfrey's cordial, now there's a real eyebrow raiser. It was a syrup marketed for infants and children, composed mostly of opium, molasses, and sassafras. It soothed colic, teething, and probably most of childhood. It also slowly shut down small organs. You shiver a little. Parenting in the Victorian era, 1 part love, 2 parts wild guesswork. You close the tin gently. No judgment. Just a lot of sighing. Because the truth is, these potions weren't just about sleep. They were about control. Control over the racing thoughts. Over grief. Over a child who wouldn't stop crying. Over a widow who couldn't stop weeping. Over a body that refused to play along with the polite fiction of nighttime. Sometimes sleep wasn't the goal, it was the escape. You glance around the kitchen again and notice an old recipe card tucked beneath a stack of chipped plates. It's labeled Mrs. Kendrick's sleep syrup and lists ingredients like poppy syrup, orange peel, anise, and clove. It promises rest within a quarter hour and advises no more than 2 spoonfuls, or dreams may become too vivid. That last part is underlined twice. The card has stains, grease, wine, possibly a thumbprint in ink, and you can't help but imagine Mrs. Kendrick standing right here, pouring a dose for her husband, or perhaps herself, after a particularly long night. Not every cure was meant to be shared. Some fringe households experimented with sleep remedies so obscure they bordered on folklore. There's record of a Yorkshire woman who swore by boiling 3 beetles in milk and drinking it just before bed. Another tale mentions placing a silver spoon under the tongue and reciting Psalm 4 verse 8 3 times, without blinking. Whatever worked. You walk over to the hearth and imagine the fire roaring, shadows dancing across the stone. A pot suspended over the flames. A gentle simmer. Steam curling like a sleepy ghost. Maybe the person tending the flame isn't trying to make dinner. Maybe they're coaxing together just enough hope to rest. Your hand rests on the mantle. The stone is cool. Stable. Because for all the strange brews and questionable concoctions, what you're really seeing is human persistence. The willingness to try something. The refusal to surrender to a mind that won't shut up. A night that won't end. You step back from the fire, taking one last look around the kitchen. The tin stays closed now. The recipe card rests quietly where you found it. You're not taking anything with you. You're just remembering. As you leave the room, the air grows warmer, and the scent of clove seems to follow you faintly up the stairs. Maybe it's all in your head. Maybe that's the point. You reach the landing again, moving a little slower now. Each step a little less about getting somewhere, and a little more about listening to the floor breathe back. Back upstairs, you move past the dim hallway like you've been here before in a dream. A draft threads through the air, curling under a half-open door at the end of the corridor. You nudge it open and find yourself inside what must have once been the master bedroom. Heavy drapes hang like velvet walls on either side of the bed, drawn to keep out the moon or the world, whichever was louder that night. The four-poster frame looms solemn and stately, like it's judging your posture. You pad across the rug, a muted floral swirl that's worn smooth by decades of sleepless pacing. And on the bedside table, a brass oil lamp, a silver hairbrush, and a small velvet box that opens with a soft snap. Inside is a black satin sleep mask. Perfectly shaped, lined in lace, with a tiny embroidered label on the inside. 4 Frail Ladies and Restless Souls, AP Grafton, London. Victorians didn't mess around when it came to the theatre of sleep. And sleep masks were a part of that nocturnal ritual. For many, especially women, sleep preparation was practically a second wardrobe change. The body had to be readied for slumber, as if it were going out for the evening, only inward. Silk wraps, pomade for the scalp, lavender-scented gloves, and yes, ornate sleep masks, these were more than vanity. They were part of a belief that sleep was not just a necessity, but an art form. And sometimes, a performance. You lie on the bed carefully. The mattress gives under you with that slow, uncertain exhale of old springs. Overhead, the ceiling is faintly cracked, like it once bore witness to someone's 4 a.m. existential crisis. You can almost hear the whisper of fabric as a woman steps into her nighttime dressing gown. She adjusts her lace cuffs, pins her hair loosely with a mother-of-pearl comb, and lowers the sleep mask over her eyes like a curtain coming down. But it wasn't all luxury. Across the room, you notice something odd, a glass dome on a pedestal. Inside, a small candle flickers. Just one. Encased. Carefully measured. This was a slumber lamp, often used to create low, steady illumination that wouldn't disturb the nervous. There's even an 1880 pamphlet advertising the Sure Sleeper Slumber Dome, promising gentle, pacifying glow to avert fears, phantasms, and night terrors. Historians still debate whether these night lights were actually calming, or if they simply gave people something to fixate on when everything else was silent. Did it soothe, or did it simply delay the dread? You close your eyes, and through your lids, you can still sense the faint glow. That's the idea. That even in darkness, you aren't alone. The night isn't quite a void. There's something, anything, left burning. On the nightstand, tucked beside a fading book of poetry, is another little velvet booklet labeled Sleep Etiquette for Gentle Persons. It's slim, handwritten, and somehow both earnest and absurd. One page reads, "Ensure silence of the draperies before midnight. Open no correspondence after the 9th chime. Engage only in spiritual reflection or tepid conversation." Spiritual reflection or tepid conversation. That was the late Victorian bedtime vibe. No shocking news. No excitement. And absolutely no sudden political debates. Only quiet, introspective musing, or the weather. Preferably fog. You glance toward the window. The drapes are heavy, but a sliver of London grey leaks through. You imagine what it must have been like to lie here night after night, listening to horses' hooves fade into rain, wondering if the flicker you saw in the shadows was a dream or something waiting for you to blink. There's a drawer beneath the nightstand. You slide it open. Inside, a pressed handkerchief, a bottle of lavender water, and a curious little object, an ear trumpet. Yes, an actual ear trumpet. Because one common reason for insomnia was phantom noise, a ticking clock no one else could hear, the creak of floorboards not walked on, or that most Victorian of afflictions, oral irritability. Some even claimed to hear whispers or bells at night. Hence the ear trumpet, not to amplify sound, but to diagnose it. You lift it, awkwardly. Imagine someone lying here, eyes wide, turning the trumpet slowly toward a suspicious corner of the room, trying to prove that yes, something is whispering. And maybe it was. Or maybe the mind, deprived of rest, starts making its own entertainment. Of course, there were gentler aids too. A bowl of warm milk, sometimes infused with nutmeg or lettuce water, waited nearby. Yes, lettuce again. Always lettuce. The Victorians were committed to their leafy solutions. There's even a mention in Lady Armitage's 1892 housekeeping journal of her soothing bedtime brew, which was basically just boiled romaine in a teacup. You imagine sipping that now. The warmth. The earthiness. The slight disappointment that it's not cocoa. But maybe it works, because you expect it to. Because sometimes the body listens to belief. And so much of Victorian sleep culture was just that expectation, ritual, repetition. Not always effective, but deeply human. You curl on the bed now, pulling the old coverlet over your legs. The embroidered patterns feel like maps you can't read. But they point somewhere. To slowness. To surrender. Outside, the faint whistle of wind against glass. Inside, the tick of a slumber lamp. Beneath you, a bed that remembers. And beside you, a world that tried, night after night, to hush itself to sleep. The room holds its breath as you sit up slowly, leaving behind the worn indent on the bed. That hush isn't silence, it's memory, cloaked in stillness. You pause by the door, glancing back once at the slumber lamp, still flickering faintly under its glass dome, a miniature lighthouse for the lost. The hallway beckons again, only this time you follow a softer thread, away from bedrooms and down a narrower passage. It's colder here, less lived in. And at the end, there's a single wooden door, barely ajar, with a scent leaking through that's part mildew, part something medicinal, something herbal. You push the door open and step into what appears to be a private apothecary. Not the dusty, tin-filled stash from earlier, but something more elaborate. Glass bottles in tidy rows line the shelves, each with handwritten labels in looping cursive: tincture of lettuce, infusion of poppy head, oil of bitter orange, water of hyssop. This, apparently, is where the real nocturnal experimentation happened. Victorians were absolutely fixated on the idea that sleep could be coaxed with plants, particularly lettuce, which, as ridiculous as it sounds now, was considered a gentle sedative for centuries. They didn't just eat it. They soaked it, boiled it, pulverized it, and bottled it. Lettuce tea was all the rage, especially from the variety known as Lactica virosa, or wild lettuce. Spoiler: it's not the kind you throw in a Caesar salad. Historians still debate whether wild lettuce actually had sedative effects or if it simply gave people something else to focus on besides their insomnia. Some swear by the presence of lactucarium, a white, bitter sap believed to act like mild opium. Others think the placebo was doing all the heavy lifting. Either way, Victorian households brewed it faithfully. Lettuce water was the chamomile of its time, minus the charm and slightly more garden salad aroma. On a nearby desk lies a small bound notebook, its pages spotted with pressed petals, scribbled formulas, and the occasional tea stain. Someone spent years perfecting bedtime brews here. One page is dedicated entirely to the 5-spoon rule, a popular folk belief that drinking 5 spoonfuls of any herb steeped for 5 minutes would ensure 5 hours of sleep. Sounds like someone just really liked symmetry. You skim the ingredients. 2 sprigs of lavender. A pinch of valerian. 3 drops of laudanum, optional, it says, casual. 1 leaf of lettuce, crushed by hand. Stir only clockwise to prevent unsettling dreams. You pause. That last line, it's unclear whether it's superstition or science. Probably both. Victorians didn't just lean into science, they waltzed arm in arm with magic and folklore. They wore amulets to bed, placed sprigs of rosemary under pillows to banish nightmares, and yes, really, stitched small pouches of dried lettuce into the lining of nightcaps. Functional fashion, if you will. Some even swore by hanging damp lettuce leaves above the bedpost. The logic: as the moisture evaporated, it released soporific lettuce vapors into the air. In theory, this sounds almost like a DIY humidifier. In practice, your bedroom probably smelled like a compost bin. But hey, you've got to respect the dedication. You step further into the room and notice a display case on the far wall. Inside, pressed between 2 panes of wavy glass, is a full Victorian herbarium sheet labeled somniferous specimens. It features dried lettuce leaves, poppy petals, a sprig of hops, and something vaguely spiky, possibly thorn apple. You wonder how many sleepless nights these plants represented. How many hopes pinned to them like butterflies. Near the fireplace, there's a copper kettle blackened from use, its spout still stained with dried sap. You imagine it hissing over a low flame, the scent of earth and metal rising as someone prepared their evening potion. Maybe they added a touch of honey, just to soften the bitterness. Or maybe not. Some things were meant to taste medicinal, to remind you they were working. And they weren't just brewing these concoctions for themselves. Insomnia ran through entire households. Servants, children, the elderly. Even pets weren't spared. A few dog manuals from the period recommend infused lettuce water for anxious spaniels who bark through the night. Because nothing ruins Victorian respectability like a neurotic dog. You pause beside a small wooden cabinet. Inside, more vials. One is labeled simply Hush. The label reads, "For troubled sleep and too much thought. Take with milk and a short prayer." It's unclear what's in it. Possibly just lavender and sugar water. Possibly laudanum and crushed beetle shells. The Victorians weren't always transparent about their recipes. Or their prayers. You sit on a nearby stool, letting your fingers trail along the herb labels, imagining the person who came here each evening, stirring, measuring, hoping. Hoping this time they'd fall asleep before the thoughts started racing. Before the shadows stretched too long. Before the silence got too loud. And maybe they did. Or maybe they didn't. But they kept trying. You glance at the dried lettuce leaf pinned to the back of the cabinet. It's crisp now. Fragile. Almost golden. A monument to effort, however leafy. Because that's the heart of this quiet obsession with natural sleep aids. They believed in trying. In listening to plants. In trusting something older than clocks. In surrendering not to sleep, but to the possibility of sleep. You rise and leave the apothecary behind, closing the door with a gentle click. The hallway meets you like an old friend. Your footsteps are quieter now. The silence doesn't press, it follows, curiously. And somewhere behind you, a kettle sits still, its spout pointing toward dreams that smell faintly of lettuce and lavender. You drift down the hall, following a change in the air, warmer, rounder. The scent of old varnish and faint dust guides you like a lullaby written in scent. You descend a creaking staircase, the balusters smooth from generations of uncertain hands, until your foot reaches a carpeted landing. To your left, an archway opens into a parlor. But this one's different from the rest, smaller, more intimate, with red flocked wallpaper and a fireplace where logs lie charred but still faintly scented with cedar. And in the center, commanding the room like an anchor of stillness, stands a piano. Not the kind tucked into the background of a drawing room to gather dust and doilies. No. This one's open, ready, and adored. Its keys slightly yellowed, its legs curved like they could waltz away on their own. You don't need to be told, this was the lullaby room. Victorians didn't just use music for sleep, they prescribed it. Gentle piano melodies were considered one of the safest, most refined cures for insomnia, especially among the upper class. Doctors recommended soothing intervals, slow tempo, and music in a major key unless your patient had a flair for melancholy, in which case something minor and meandering would do. You take a seat on the piano bench. It creaks politely beneath you. There's a sheet of music already spread across the stand, Nocturne in G for nervous minds. Handwritten. Dated 1878. At the bottom, in small cursive, play softly, with hesitation. You imagine someone sitting here each night, playing just barely above a whisper. A single lamp glowing at the corner of the room. The sound drifting up the stairwell, note by note, like steam. Historians still argue whether this nightly musical ritual was more psychological than medicinal. Was it the music itself that soothed the nerves, or simply the repetition, the familiar motions, the gentle way it gave people permission to not think? You press a key. The note is low and warm, like it's been sleeping in the instrument all this time, waiting. And here's where it gets weird, in the charmingly Victorian way. Some families actually hired evening pianists. Yes, people whose entire job was to come into the home at twilight and play slow music until the household yawned itself unconscious. In one memoir, a young woman remembers her father insisting that nocturnal harmony staves off the demons of thought. Which sounds dramatic. But then again, if you've ever been wide awake at 3 a.m. with your brain doing cartwheels, you get it. In another corner of the room, you spot a curious piece of furniture, a Symphonia chair. It looks like a regular Victorian armchair, lace antimacassar, curved arms, suspicious floral upholstery, but on closer inspection, there's a small compartment near the base. You open it and find a mechanism not unlike a music box. It's a miniature music player, wound with a brass crank, designed to gently hum lullabies through the back of the chair. Marketed as musical sedation for the weary spine, These chairs were said to deliver tones directly into the body. The theory was that vibrations, not just sound, could pacify the nervous system. A kind of protosound bath, but less woo-woo and more waistcoat. The one here seems to play Brahms' lullaby, though the mechanism grinds a little. You imagine it faintly humming as someone settles into the chair after a long, overstimulated day of corset wearing and trying not to die of cholera. You rise and move toward a small writing desk nestled near the piano. A letter lies open. Its ink is brown with age, the handwriting looping with the sleepy confidence of someone winding down. Dearest M. The piano was played as you advised. Your little theme with the descending thirds worked marvelously. By the second page, Father was dozing, and I confess I nodded off myself not long after. I shall try it again tonight. Music, it seems, does what no powder can. You smile. Because yes, Victorian England had access to opium, ether, and all sorts of dubious tonics. But for some, a soft piano theme was all it took. You play another note. Then two. You're no virtuoso, but the melody is slow enough that even clumsy fingers sound deliberate. The sound doesn't fill the room. It leans into it. And in doing so, it reveals just how quiet the world around it is. Above you, creaks and whispers settle. Even the house seems to be listening. Not all musical prescriptions were so elegant. Some books recommended the repetition of simple hymnals or even the rhythmic reading of poetry to metronomic accompaniment. One health journal from 1883 claimed that a gentle waltz or quadrille performed at half speed could produce dreams of pastoral contentment. Pastoral contentment. That's a phrase only a Victorian could say without laughing. You imagine it now, a half-speed waltz, barely keeping time, lulling your mind away from the day's static. Not quite dancing, not quite dreaming, just drifting. And there were devices, too. One notorious example, the tonograph, a patented invention that mechanically played piano loops at a volume measured not to stir the faintest mouse. It never really caught on, mostly because it looked like a haunted sewing machine and broke easily. But the desire behind it, that craving for mechanical comfort, lingers. That idea that maybe, just maybe, a few gentle notes could tilt your mind toward surrender. You lean back on the bench. Your shoulders relax. There's a warmth to the room now, not from heat, but from something more subtle. A memory of sound, perhaps. The sheet music in front of you turns slightly in the breeze from a cracked window. You let your eyes close. If this were your home, you think, you'd play every night. Slowly, softly, until the world blurred and the music became a bridge. A bridge from thought to silence. You leave the parlor slowly, the piano's last note still ringing somewhere behind your ears like the final breath of a dream you can't quite remember. Your fingers twitch with the phantom weight of keys. And your footsteps, newly softened by something you can't name, guide you toward a narrower hallway, less grand, more lived in. It smells of dried flowers and old laundry here. A door at the end swings open at your touch, and you find yourself in what was clearly once a child's bedroom. The walls are papered in a faded botanical print, sprigs of ivy curling in predictable patterns, almost like someone hoped even the walls could soothe the restless. You cross to the window. The moon has shifted. It casts a long silver triangle across the room. You follow its light to a tiny iron-framed bed, barely wide enough for dreams. Children, of course, didn't escape the grip of insomnia, not even in Victorian England. In fact, some scholars argue that sleep anxiety began with the children. Not because they were particularly stressed, though growing up in an age of chimney soot and moral expectations was no picnic, but because of what Victorian adults believed about growing minds. And those beliefs were intense. There's an open book on the nightstand, Dr. Allingham's Guide to Proper Child Sleep. Published 1872. The title page has an engraving of a child tucked in so tightly they resemble a bundled scroll. Beneath it, the words, "The mind calms as the limbs are stilled." It's equal parts advice manual and manifesto. Victorian parents believed that a child's sleep, or lack of it, was a direct reflection of their moral condition. Restless child? Clearly undisciplined. Fidgety sleeper? Evidence of an overactive imagination, which was, apparently, one of the gravest threats to Victorian society. So they designed sleep routines like boot camp. Lights out by 7. No books after tea. No sweets. And absolutely no storytelling that encouraged fancy. Goodbye, fairies. Hello, moral parables with extra consequences. You spot a toy box in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. Inside, amid a tangle of wooden blocks and faded felt animals, you find an oddly shaped rattle. When shaken, it emits a low, thrumming hum. Not cheerful. Not jingling. But droning. It's a sleep rattle. Yes, really. Some Victorians believed that low, rhythmic vibrations, especially ones without sharp clinks or musical tones, could lull infants into sleep. It's part rattle, part sound experiment, part psychological gamble. You give it a shake. It's oddly calming. Like if a bumblebee whispered at you. Historians still debate whether these strange contraptions actually helped soothe children or if they just kept desperate parents distracted for a few more minutes. You find a journal wedged beside the bed frame. Its leather spine is cracked, and the entries are brief. From what you can piece together, it belonged to a governess, likely one responsible for the children in this household. May 12th, Samuel would not settle again. I've tried the warmed milk and the pine-scented sachet. Tonight I shall attempt the linen strips across the wrists. They say it mimics the cradle. You blink. Linen strips. Apparently, some caretakers bound children's wrists lightly, not to restrain, but to simulate the cozy pressure of being held. The theory, gentle compression signaled safety to the body. Like a hug that lasted long after the lights went out. And then there's the matter of scent. You notice a small pillow tucked under the child's main one. It's flatter, finer, and smells vaguely of crushed rosemary. These were dream sachets, herbal blends stitched into pillowcases or kept nearby to promote restful sleep. Recipes varied, but many included lavender, chamomile, sweet marjoram, and you guessed it, lettuce leaf. Some included tiny slips of paper with calming verses tucked inside. You find one now, faded but legible. Lay down, dear mind, and still thy pace. The night is wide, but full of grace. No monsters under the bed. Just gentle rhymes, linen wristbands, and invisible clouds of marjoram mist. Victorian childhood was, in many ways, an over-engineered performance. Sleep included. There were strict expectations, how to lie, when to close your eyes, what direction to face, east was best, apparently symbolic and spiritual. And if all else failed, there was always the bedtime tonic. Children's sleep potions were just a smidge less intense than adult ones. Many contained soothing syrup, a sugary suspension that might have included morphine or alcohol, depending on how much the pharmacist liked you. Some bore charming names like Mrs. Winslow's Quiet Mixture or the Gentle Drop. These were sold widely, promoted heavily, beloved deeply by exhausted caregivers. Of course, we now know they were dangerous. Lethal, even. But back then, They were just another tool in the arsenal of nighttime peace. You glance at the bed again, imagining a small body curled tightly under woolen covers, soot-smudged cheeks finally still. The house creaking gently. Somewhere downstairs, a piano softens the air. You wonder if the child dreamt of meadows, or if they simply slipped into blackness, soothed by syrup and song. You linger for a moment more, then step carefully back into the hallway. A faint breeze trails behind you, lavender, wood smoke, ink. And now, on to where the grown-ups went when their own methods failed. When herbs and hymns and lullabies gave way to something more deliberate. You descend a narrow set of stairs. Deeper now. The house shifts. It's time to meet the night's more mechanical ambitions. You climb the stairs slowly, half expecting some curious contraption to creak behind you, perhaps the somniator stirring in its cradle of springs, or the electro chair giving one last heroic zap in protest. But no. The machines are quiet now, as if they've finally accepted their obsolescence. Back in the main house, things feel lighter, warmer. You follow the scent of something, earthy, bitter, even. A familiar tang if you've ever steeped anything vaguely healthy. And then you see it. The humble teapot. A brown ceramic one, squat and dependable, sitting beside a tidy little collection of herbal packets. The labels are hand-lettered in careful script: chamomile, poppy, lettuce, skullcap, valerian root. Ah, the apothecary era of insomnia. Victorians loved a good remedy, especially one that came from the garden. But this wasn't some Pinterest-inspired tea time. This was medicine disguised as ritual, boiling water turned into a kind of faith. And at the center of it all was the mighty lettuce. Yes, lettuce. The same thing in your sad office salad or limp sandwich. But back then, it wasn't just a vegetable, it was a sleep weapon. You settle into a wooden chair beside the teapot, and imagine yourself a little insomniac lord or lady, swirling your lettuce infusion with a tiny silver spoon, hoping the bitterness would knock you out faster than boredom. Victorian texts refer to it as lactucarium, the milky white sap extracted from the stalks of certain lettuce varieties, especially wild lettuce, Lactica virosa. This sap was dried, powdered, and sometimes consumed in small pills or mixed into teas. It was nicknamed lettuce opium, though chemically speaking, it had none of opium's punch, just a faint sedative quality that required either total faith or deeply frayed nerves to believe in. Historians still argue whether the effects were pharmacological or psychological. Was it truly calming? Or just part of the Victorian placebo ecosystem? Either way, people swore by it. Recipes flourished. One popular version included 2 leaves of wild lettuce, 1 teaspoon of poppy seeds, a pinch of chamomile, a single drop of valerian tincture, because too much made your dreams weird. The process was meditative. You'd steep everything together, cover the pot, and then, this was crucial, sip slowly in a darkened room while listening to the soft hiss of the fire. You couldn't just gulp sleep. You had to coax it. Like a feral cat or your Wi-Fi router. Of course, not everyone trusted teas. Some wanted pills. So, enter the Victorian sleep lozenge, a charmingly lethal little disc sold at chemist counters with cheery names like Dr. Barnaby's slumber pellets or the dreaming drop. And oh, the ingredients. Let's just say they were committed. You pick up a small tin on a nearby shelf. The label reads, for nervous wakefulness, the bedside solution, lettuce and laudanum pastils. Yep. That lettuce opium often teamed up with real opium to ensure you stayed asleep long enough to miss breakfast. Still, some preferred more innocent options. Like possets, warm drinks made from milk, ale, sugar, and spice, sometimes thickened with egg. Think proto-custard, but mildly sedative. A posset was comforting. Heavy. Like swallowing a bedtime hug. You open a drawer and find an old glass bottle labeled simply, syrup of sleep. Inside, something amber and slightly viscous still clings to the edges. A handwritten note beside it reads, "Take 1 spoon before the fire dies. Let the tongue rest in the sweetness. Sleep will follow the second yawn." Romantic, isn't it? But not all remedies were so poetic. Some households relied on simpler, harsher solutions. Like smoking lettuce leaves. Yes. Victorians rolled dried lettuce like tobacco, believing the inhalation of its essence might lull the brain into silence. How effective was this? Historians are divided. Some claim the practice persisted more for ritual's sake than science. Others note that lettuce leaves, when burned, release a bitter, soporific aroma that might encourage drowsiness, provided you weren't choking from the smoke. You spot an old pipe resting in a tray of dried herbs, confirming that at least someone here gave it a try. The most devout among the herbalists even cultivated entire sleep gardens, plots devoted to soporific plants like lavender, lemon balm, chamomile, and yes, good old lettuce. They believed that just walking through the garden before bed, brushing fingertips along the stalks, might prepare the body for rest. There's something oddly modern about that idea, sleep as a process, not an event. Not something you do, but something you drift into, like fog rolling over the hills. You glance at the teacup again. A ring of dried herbs circles the rim. You imagine the lady of the house here, fingers tight around the handle, eyes red from another sleepless night, whispering, "Just 1 more cup. Just 1 more leaf. Just 1 more hour." And maybe it helped. Maybe sometimes, that bitterness took the edge off the spiral. Maybe she closed her eyes, sighed into the firelight, and let the lettuce do what it could. You rise now, quietly, and move to the hallway. The scent of herbs follows like a gentle exhale. But sleep wasn't only treated by herbs and hope. No. There were rules, too. Beliefs. Rituals tied to body and room and hour. You step onto another staircase, wider this time, statelier. You're headed to the bedrooms. Where furniture wasn't just furniture, it was medicine. And every pillow, every plank of wood, was part of the plan. You climb the stairs slowly, half expecting some curious contraption to creak behind you, perhaps the somniator stirring in its cradle of springs, or the electro chair giving one last heroic zap in protest. But no. The machines are quiet now, as if they've finally accepted their obsolescence. Back in the main house, things feel lighter, warmer. You follow the scent of something, earthy, bitter, even. A familiar tang if you've ever steeped anything vaguely healthy. And then you see it. The humble teapot. A brown ceramic one, squat and dependable, sitting beside a tidy little collection of herbal packets. The labels are hand-lettered in careful script: chamomile, poppy, lettuce, skullcap, valerian root. Ah, the apothecary era of insomnia. Victorians loved a good remedy, especially one that came from the garden. But this wasn't some Pinterest-inspired tea time. This was medicine disguised as ritual, boiling water turned into a kind of faith. And at the center of it all was the mighty lettuce. Yes, lettuce. The same thing in your sad office salad or limp sandwich. But back then, it wasn't just a vegetable, it was a sleep weapon. You settle into a wooden chair beside the teapot, and imagine yourself a little insomniac lord or lady, swirling your lettuce infusion with a tiny silver spoon, hoping the bitterness would knock you out faster than boredom. Victorian texts refer to it as lactucarium, the milky white sap extracted from the stalks of certain lettuce varieties, especially wild lettuce, Lactica virosa. This sap was dried, powdered, and sometimes consumed in small pills or mixed into teas. It was nicknamed lettuce opium, though chemically speaking, it had none of opium's punch, just a faint sedative quality that required either total faith or deeply frayed nerves to believe in. Historians still argue whether the effects were pharmacological or psychological. Was it truly calming? Or just part of the Victorian placebo ecosystem? Either way, people swore by it. Recipes flourished. One popular version included 2 leaves of wild lettuce, 1 teaspoon of poppy seeds, a pinch of chamomile, a single drop of valerian tincture, because too much made your dreams weird. The process was meditative. You'd steep everything together, cover the pot, and then, this was crucial, sip slowly in a darkened room while listening to the soft hiss of the fire. You couldn't just gulp sleep. You had to coax it. Like a feral cat or your Wi-Fi router. Of course, not everyone trusted teas. Some wanted pills. So, enter the Victorian sleep lozenge, a charmingly lethal little disc sold at chemist counters with cheery names like Dr. Barnaby's slumber pellets or the dreaming drop. And oh, the ingredients. Let's just say they were committed. You pick up a small tin on a nearby shelf. The label reads, for nervous wakefulness, the bedside solution, lettuce and laudanum pastils. Yep. That lettuce opium often teamed up with real opium to ensure you stayed asleep long enough to miss breakfast. Still, some preferred more innocent options. Like possets, warm drinks made from milk, ale, sugar, and spice, sometimes thickened with egg. Think protocustard, but mildly sedative. A posset was comforting. Heavy. Like swallowing a bedtime hug. You open a drawer and find an old glass bottle labeled simply, syrup of sleep. Inside, something amber and slightly viscous still clings to the edges. A handwritten note beside it reads, take 1 spoon before the fire dies. Let the tongue rest in the sweetness. Sleep will follow the second yawn. Romantic, isn't it? But not all remedies were so poetic. Some households relied on simpler, harsher solutions. Like smoking lettuce leaves. Yes. Victorians rolled dried lettuce like tobacco, believing the inhalation of its essence might lull the brain into silence. How effective was this? Historians are divided. Some claim the practice persisted more for ritual's sake than science. Others note that lettuce leaves, when burned, release a bitter, soporific aroma that might encourage drowsiness, provided you weren't choking from the smoke. You spot an old pipe resting in a tray of dried herbs, confirming that at least someone here gave it a try. The most devout among the herbalists even cultivated entire sleep gardens, plots devoted to soporific plants like lavender, lemon balm, chamomile, and yes, good old lettuce. They believed that just walking through the garden before bed, brushing fingertips along the stalks, might prepare the body for rest. There's something oddly modern about that idea, sleep as a process, not an event. Not something you do, but something you drift into, like fog rolling over the hills. You glance at the teacup again. A ring of dried herbs circles the rim. You imagine the lady of the house here, fingers tight around the handle, eyes red from another sleepless night, whispering, just 1 more cup. Just 1 more leaf. Just 1 more hour. And maybe it helped. Maybe sometimes, that bitterness took the edge off the spiral. Maybe she closed her eyes, sighed into the firelight, and let the lettuce do what it could. You rise now, quietly, and move to the hallway. The scent of herbs follows like a gentle exhale. But sleep wasn't only treated by herbs and hope. No. There were rules, too. Beliefs. Rituals tied to body and room and hour. You step onto another staircase, wider this time, statelier. You're headed to the bedrooms, where furniture wasn't just furniture, it was medicine. And every pillow, every plank of wood, was part of the plan. The hallway ends at a narrow door, painted the same dusky color as the walls. It doesn't creak when you push it open, just gives way with the soft click of a latch long out of fashion. Inside, the room is dim. The windows are covered in sheer curtains, thin enough to let in moonlight, thick enough to hush the world. A piano waits in the corner. It's upright, modest, and a little dusty. The kind of instrument you'd find in a schoolroom, or maybe a parlor that wanted to sound cultured but couldn't afford a full baby grand. You can almost hear it before you touch it, a tentative waltz, a sleepy sonata, the kind of music that leans into silence rather than bursting through it. You close the door behind you and step into the small space. There's not much here, just the piano, a stool, a few chairs pushed politely against the wall. And on the floor, faded sheet music scattered like autumn leaves. Titles like Nocturne for Nervous Ladies and Dreamtime Air in E minor. Victorian insomnia wasn't just fought with medicine or routine. Sometimes, it was fought with melody. This was the era of the music cure, a belief that certain musical structures, especially slow, repetitive ones in minor keys, could lull the overwrought brain into slumber. And it wasn't just a pleasant theory. It was marketed, prescribed. There were books titled Songs for Sleepers, and piano prescriptions for the weak-nerved. Gentle, looping phrases designed not to entertain, but to quiet. You sit down on the stool and let your fingers hover just above the keys. They're smooth and slightly sticky with age, a few of them chipped, but still echoing stories. You press a single note. Soft. Hollow. Like a yawn made of wood. Victorian doctors wrote excitedly about the hypnotic cadence, the ideal rhythm for coaxing sleep. Not too complex. No sudden tempo shifts. No high drama. Just slow, repetitive sound, like a cradle rocking back and forth. The most recommended meter, 6/8 time, gentle, swaying, almost like a lullaby caught in a fog. One famous composition of the time was Bedside No. 4, The Sleeper's Cradle, a simple left-hand bass with whispering treble arpeggios. Played at just the right pace, it was said to slow the breath, loosen the chest, and, in one slightly dramatic pamphlet, quieten the soul's trembling altogether. Historians still argue whether the effects of these sleep sonatas were measurable or merely suggestive. But even now, researchers acknowledge that music can synchronize with your body's rhythms, your heartbeat, your breath, even your brainwaves. The Victorians may not have had EEG machines, but they noticed what worked. You play a few imaginary chords in the air. The room responds by seeming to shrink inward, cozying up around you. Not everyone used piano music as a personal lullaby, though. For some, it was communal. Insomnia clubs, yes, those existed, would gather late at night for musical restoration sessions. Imagine 20 people sitting on hard chairs in a candlelit drawing room, sipping lettuce tea and listening to a painfully slow nocturne played on a slightly out-of-tune instrument. That's either therapy or performance art. Possibly both. In one recorded case, a gentleman of fragile nerves insisted on being played to sleep every night by his valet, who learned precisely 4 approved pieces and rotated them methodically. When the valet quit, the man suffered a week-long bout of wakefulness, during which he composed a dramatic letter to the Lancet titled The Peril of Sudden Silence. Victorian drama. Truly unmatched. There's something achingly tender about it all, though. The idea that sleep could be coaxed, not forced. That music wasn't just sound, but a kind of permission to let go, to sink inward, to rest. The piano wasn't the only sleep sound tool in the Victorian arsenal. Some homes used harmoniums or even mechanical music boxes, wound slowly and placed on bedside tables. One model, hilariously named the hypnoscope, played 30 minutes of lulling melodies before fading out with a bell chime, after which you were expected, no pressure, to be asleep. Others went for more ambient approaches. One contraption, the nocturne bellows, simulated distant church organs and was meant to mimic the acoustics of a foggy night. It was briefly popular among melancholy poets and dramatically sensitive teenagers. Of course, not all music was welcomed. Quick tempos, dangerous, marches, invigorating, anything in a major key, suspiciously cheerful. There were even music critics who reviewed pieces based solely on their sedative potential. One especially snobby review read, "While lullaby for the restless attempts serenity, it fails by venturing too briskly into allegro. Anxious types will find no peace here." You smile at that one. Even back then, sleep was big business and everyone had opinions. You lean forward again and press 2 soft notes. Then a third. You hum under your breath something simple, something circular. Just enough to feel the edge of a dream. This wasn't just therapy for the mind. It was a balm for the lonely. Because insomnia, then as now, was isolating. You'd wander your house at 2 a.m., past all the closed doors, the ticking clocks, and feel like the only person awake in the world. But music reminded you someone else had been here before, had also sat up, twitching, desperate, and thought, maybe this will help. You look to the sheet music scattered around. Some pages are dog-eared, some stained with tea or candle wax. Each one tells the same story, someone, somewhere, trying to sleep with grace. Or at least not panic. You rise from the piano, gently shutting the floorboard. The room feels warmer now, as if the music has left an echo behind, even without playing a full song. And then, quiet. A silence that feels earned. But before you leave this place, there's one final space to visit. The morning room. The one where they tried to explain the unexplainable. Where doctors, patients, and philosophers all sat together and said, maybe insomnia isn't a problem. Maybe it's just part of the mystery. You walk slowly now, almost ready. The hallway ends at a narrow door, painted the same dusky color as the walls. It doesn't creak when you push it open, just gives way with the soft click of a latch long out of fashion. Inside, the room is dim. The windows are covered in sheer curtains, thin enough to let in moonlight, thick enough to hush the world. A piano waits in the corner. It's upright, modest, and a little dusty. The kind of instrument you'd find in a schoolroom, or maybe a parlor that wanted to sound cultured but couldn't afford a full baby grand. You can almost hear it before you touch it, a tentative waltz, a sleepy sonata, the kind of music that leans into silence rather than bursting through it. You close the door behind you and step into the small space. There's not much here, just the piano, a stool, a few chairs pushed politely against the wall. And on the floor, faded sheet music scattered like autumn leaves. Titles like Nocturne for Nervous Ladies and Dreamtime Air in E minor. Victorian insomnia wasn't just fought with medicine or routine. Sometimes, it was fought with melody. This was the era of the music cure, a belief that certain musical structures, especially slow, repetitive ones in minor keys, could lull the overwrought brain into slumber. And it wasn't just a pleasant theory. It was marketed, prescribed. There were books titled Songs for Sleepers, and piano prescriptions for the weak-nerved. Gentle, looping phrases designed not to entertain, but to quiet. You sit down on the stool and let your fingers hover just above the keys. They're smooth and slightly sticky with age, a few of them chipped, but still echoing stories. You press a single note. Soft. Hollow. Like a yawn made of wood. Victorian doctors wrote excitedly about the hypnotic cadence, the ideal rhythm for coaxing sleep. Not too complex. No sudden tempo shifts. No high drama. Just slow, repetitive sound, like a cradle rocking back and forth. The most recommended meter, 6/8 time, gentle, swaying, almost like a lullaby caught in a fog. One famous composition of the time was Bedside No. 4, The Sleeper's Cradle, a simple left-hand bass with whispering treble arpeggios. Played at just the right pace, it was said to slow the breath, loosen the chest, and, in one slightly dramatic pamphlet, quieten the soul's trembling altogether. Historians still argue whether the effects of these sleep sonatas were measurable or merely suggestive. But even now, researchers acknowledge that music can synchronize with your body's rhythms, your heartbeat, your breath, even your brainwaves. The Victorians may not have had EEG machines, but they noticed what worked. You play a few imaginary chords in the air. The room responds by seeming to shrink inward, cozying up around you. Not everyone used piano music as a personal lullaby, though. For some, it was communal. Insomnia clubs, yes, those existed, would gather late at night for musical restoration sessions. Imagine 20 people sitting on hard chairs in a candlelit drawing room, sipping lettuce tea and listening to a painfully slow nocturne played on a slightly out-of-tune instrument. That's either therapy or performance art. Possibly both. In one recorded case, a gentleman of fragile nerves insisted on being played to sleep every night by his valet, who learned precisely 4 approved pieces and rotated them methodically. When the valet quit, the man suffered a week-long bout of wakefulness, during which he composed a dramatic letter to the Lancet titled The Peril of Sudden Silence. Victorian drama. Truly unmatched. There's something achingly tender about it all, though. The idea that sleep could be coaxed, not forced. That music wasn't just sound, but a kind of permission to let go, to sink inward, to rest. The piano wasn't the only sleep sound tool in the Victorian arsenal. Some homes used harmoniums or even mechanical music boxes, wound slowly and placed on bedside tables. One model, hilariously named the hypnoscope, played 30 minutes of lulling melodies before fading out with a bell chime, after which you were expected, no pressure, to be asleep. Others went for more ambient approaches. One contraption, the nocturne bellows, simulated distant church organs and was meant to mimic the acoustics of a foggy night. It was briefly popular among melancholy poets and dramatically sensitive teenagers. Of course, not all music was welcomed. Quick tempos, dangerous, marches, invigorating, anything in a major key, suspiciously cheerful. There were even music critics who reviewed pieces based solely on their sedative potential. One especially snobby review read, "While lullaby for the restless attempts serenity, it fails by venturing too briskly into allegro. Anxious types will find no peace here." You smile at that one. Even back then, sleep was big business and everyone had opinions. You lean forward again and press 2 soft notes. Then a third. You hum under your breath, something simple, something circular. Just enough to feel the edge of a dream. This wasn't just therapy for the mind. It was a balm for the lonely. Because insomnia, then as now, was isolating. You'd wander your house at 2 a.m., past all the closed doors, the ticking clocks, and feel like the only person awake in the world. But music reminded you someone else had been here before, had also sat up, twitching, desperate, and thought, maybe this will help. You look to the sheet music scattered around. Some pages are dog-eared, some stained with tea or candle wax. Each one tells the same story, someone, somewhere, trying to sleep with grace. Or at least not panic. You rise from the piano, gently shutting the floorboard. The room feels warmer now, as if the music has left an echo behind, even without playing a full song. And then, quiet. A silence that feels earned. But before you leave this place, there's one final space to visit. The morning room. The one where they tried to explain the unexplainable. Where doctors, patients, and philosophers all sat together and said, maybe insomnia isn't a problem. Maybe it's just part of the mystery. You walk slowly now. Almost ready. The stairs creak differently now, less like protest, more like memory. You've explored the bedrooms, the bathtubs, the beds and blankets and the buckwheat pillows. You've seen letters steeped in boiling water, soporific sonatas played at half speed, and people begging the moon not to shine too brightly. Now, finally, you drift toward the last room. The place Victorians went not to sleep, but to make peace with the fact that they couldn't. The morning room. You open the door and step inside. Light filters in, even at night, because the curtains here are drawn back. There's no pretense of darkness. The walls are soft yellow, the furniture pale green. Nothing in here demands you sleep. This is the room that waits patiently for you to give up trying. And that, perhaps, is its secret power. You sit on a chaise, the kind with one curved arm and a pillow exactly where your neck wants it. There's a small writing desk by the window, a carafe of water, and a diary laid open. The ink has faded, but you can still make out the words. Third night this week with no rest. I've taken the syrup, played the sonata, laid facing east. Still the thoughts spin. Perhaps I am meant to be awake. Perhaps sleep is not always required. It's not defeat. It's surrender. The gentle kind. The kind where you realize maybe the body knows something you don't. Victorian physicians had an entire category of journals and essays dedicated to this state. They called it productive insomnia, the belief that nighttime wakefulness might serve a purpose. That sleeplessness, rather than a failure, might be a signal. You rise and run your fingers over a small table filled with objects, a prayer stone from Wales, a dried sprig of rosemary, a little bell meant to ring once if your thoughts began racing, as a way to interrupt the spiral. Each item feels like part of a ritual, but not one obsessed with results. These people weren't trying to force sleep anymore. They were trying to understand what it meant when it refused to come. Historians still argue whether this was true acceptance or just upper-class coping. After all, it's easier to romanticize insomnia when you don't have to rise at dawn to scrub coal from chimney flues. But here, in this room, there is at least the illusion of grace. A way of saying, if sleep doesn't want me tonight, then perhaps I can just sit quietly with the not sleep. On the mantel sits a peculiar little item, a glass hourglass filled not with sand, but with tiny lavender seeds. Flip it, and it spills slowly, scenting the air. It runs for exactly 30 minutes. That's all. You flip it now and watch as the seeds begin to tumble. Soft sound. Slow motion. Like a visual lullaby. You walk toward the window. Outside, the garden is silver in the moonlight. Somewhere out there, night-blooming flowers open their petals and bats flicker like thoughts across the sky. Someone in the next house turns over in their bed. The world is not entirely asleep, even now. And that makes you feel just a little less alone. There's a book on the armrest. You pick it up. It's a personal journal, published posthumously, of a woman named Eliza Torrance. She suffered what doctors then called night fevers, long bouts of insomnia accompanied by racing thoughts and chills. Modern medicine would likely label it anxiety, or perhaps even perimenopausal insomnia. But Eliza called it the time of the lantern thoughts. I sit in the morning room with only my candle lit. The house sleeps. I do not. My thoughts come like moths, drawn to the glow, circling, sometimes colliding, but eventually fading. I have begun to welcome them. Not as enemies, but as visitors who must pass through me. You close the book gently. Not every Victorian cure came from a bottle or a musical scale. Some came from reframing the problem entirely. What if you're not broken? What if you're just different at night? What if you're built to think while the world sleeps? They even had poetry about it. One pamphlet contains a short verse. Let not the night be feared, though sleep may stay away. For some must sit in quiet while others dream the day. The stillness too is sacred, the silence earns its keep. And all who watch the darkness find wisdom in lost sleep. It's a strange kind of comfort. The thought that maybe, just maybe, this isn't a curse. Maybe the late hours hold a kind of knowledge the daylight can't offer. The Victorians, for all their rigidity, occasionally allowed for that possibility that some people just live sideways through the hours. You lie back on the chaise, letting the room hold you. You hear nothing but the slow tick of a clock, the whisper of wind at the window, and the gentle hush of your own breath. There are no instructions left. No tinctures to try. No posture to correct. No music to play. Just you. Just night. And for once, that feels okay. You exhale slowly, and the weight in your chest loosens, just a little. You're not asleep yet. But maybe you don't have to be. Not right away. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let the weight of this strange, lovely, exhausting journey settle into your limbs like sand in still water. You've traveled through parlors and piano rooms, past lettuce teacups and lavender pillows, through the restless hearts of people long gone, but not so different from you. You've seen how tightly the Victorians clung to order, to ritual, to the hope that sleep could be summoned like a loyal pet. And you've seen how, when that failed, they sometimes surrendered not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Tonight, maybe you don't need a solution. Maybe you just need stillness. Not everything has to be fixed in order to be bearable. Some nights are quiet simply because they are, and that, too, can be a kind of peace. So let your breathing slow, like a tide going out. Let your mind soften its edges. Let the noise settle like dust in a sunbeam. And if your eyes are still open, that's okay. The world will wait. Your body knows what to do. You are not alone in this. Not now. Not ever. Let yourself float. No hurry. No pressure. No sound but the rhythm of you, quietly existing, safely resting, slowly fading. Good night, my friend.